Recruiting new employees is a never-ending task for all organizations. Knowledge, information, technology, medicine, and data are now where work and competition are anchored. This means that finding, recruiting, interviewing, evaluating, and retaining quality employees are an organization's biggest challenge. Job interviewing is extremely important. Let's assume that you've already graduated from college. Now it's time to sell yourself. You may be the very best employee that company could have. But unless you can sell yourself in a job interview, you don't get the chance to try to prove yourself. So today we're going to look at some good hints for job interviewing, and hopefully this will get you to that final stage in your career. We've studied nonverbal communication. A lot of people read nonverbal communication better than verbal communication. And in today's dress-down culture, it's not permissible to dress that way in an interviewing session. If possible, the recruit should research to see if the company has a dress code. Maybe a nice pantsuit or a dress shirt are appropriate for interviews. A ball cap or dangling jewelry are always a distraction in interviews and should not be worn. Making a good impression with clothes and good grooming is a good form of nonverbal communication. It's always best to err on the side of dressing up than dressing down. Remember, you can make your first impression within the first 30 seconds of meeting someone. So, dress for the occasion. Show the employer that you're interested and that you really want the job. It's a good idea to show up at least 15 minutes early to your job interview. This shows that you are prompt, that you're interested not only in the interview, but you're interested in the position. This type of nonverbal message could be sent to the employer or the person doing the interview that maybe if I hire them, they'll be early for the job as well. Remember, dressing nice and looking at the time, this is all nonverbal. You haven't said anything in the interview as of yet, so you want to make a good impression by both dressing nice and by showing up early. And after the interview is over, since we're speaking about time, the interview doesn't finish until you're in your car and you've driven away. There's a story that happened at a local hospital. A person was being interviewed for a nursing position, and she was being interviewed by the HR person at the local hospital. After the interview, they both shook hands, and it was time for lunch for the interviewer. So the interviewer was going to go out for lunch, and she got in her car. She was parked in the employer's parking lot, and there, as she tried to exit, there was a stop sign there, and the interviewee was pulling out at the opposite stop sign. It was clearly the employer's time to go to turn right at the stop sign, and she approached the stop sign and started turning right, and then this other person, who was the interviewee, cut in front of her. The interviewee didn't notice who was in that car. The interviewer's car's windows were tinted, and the interviewee proceeded to give the middle finger to the interviewer, and then she darted off. The interviewer, who was in the car, just shook her head and made a note that as soon as I get back to my office, I'm going to go ahead and throw that resume away. Continuing with our nonverbal theme, make sure that you maintain good eye contact throughout the interview. This shows respect to the interviewer, and you also want to bring at least 5 copies of the resume to the interview. Sometimes the HR people, let's say there might be 3 or 4 people interviewing you, they may fumble around after they shake your hand and they say, "We seem to have misplaced your resume. Do you happen to have a copy of your resume with you?" And if you don't, if you say, "No, I'm sorry, I didn't bring one," then they'll just happen to find the resume. They'll say, oh, here it is, we just misplaced it. And then they'll go ahead and start asking the questions. What they were doing is they were testing you to see if you came prepared. If you talked about always being prepared in the interview, but you didn't have an extra copy of the resume, they've already really asked you a question before they actually ask the question. So make sure that you bring some extra copies. And be careful what you post online, on Twitter or on Facebook. They can always go back there and they can do some snooping and see what type of person you are. And when you're in your interview, do not slouch. Please sit up straight, back straight, eye contact. And your email address that you put on your resume should be a professional looking email. You might have to create another email address for this. It should have maybe your first initial and your last name at yahoo.com. But make sure that it's not something with slang in it. Make it appear very professional. There are 3 major types of interviews. The first one is structured. This is where candidates are asked similar questions. This does not allow for many probing questions. All candidates will be asked the exact same questions. The reason some of the employers like to use these are it's easy to grade, it's easy to compare. Then there's unstructured interviews. Now this does allow for probing questions. The reason we say probing questions is this would be a question I could ask you, tell me about the last time you had conflict on your job. And then if you mention something, I could probe. I could say, okay, then what happened? How did you handle that? How did that make you feel? These are probing questions, so these are a little bit tougher for the employer to grade, but they can get a lot of information. You may have a combination of both structured and unstructured. And then there's panel interviews. This is normally between 3 to 15 people, but it can vary. And maybe these people on the panel might be from different parts of the company. For example, if you're a nurse, you're applying for a nursing position, you might have 2 nurses, a supervisor, an HR person, maybe a vice president on that panel. So they could ask you different questions, or they could be structured, and they just go around the table and ask the same questions to each person that they interview. So you need to be prepared for all 3. I don't want you to be scared if you show up and you see that there's 15 people getting ready to interview you. Always be prepared. Once the interview starts, there's 2 types of questioning they can do. The first one could be open-ended. This is where the interviewer allows the interviewee to expand on the answers. If they want you to expand, sometimes they say, okay, tell me more about this. Or other times, they'll just be quiet and they want you to expand. You need to verbally describe the events accurately that was in your history. Some of them, they may be close-ended questions. They'll usually ask you a question that's all you have to do is simply say yes or no, or something very short. Usually there's a combination of both. Now the topic that we need to discuss is, well then, how do they decide when to use open-ended or close-ended questions? One way they can do this is by using the funnel approach. This is where the interviewer will start by asking open-ended questions. Then they may proceed to close-ended questions. If they feel that the interview is getting long or you may be too wordy, the interviewer may start closing it up, just like that picture on the screen, like a funnel. So they'll start open and have you expand, and they'll ask some probing questions. And if you talk a little too much, they may start trying to narrow their questioning to something that's simply a short answer or a yes or no. The inverted funnel approach is where the interviewer will begin with close-ended questions, then maybe proceed to open-ended questions. One of the reasons that interviewers use this approach is if the interviewee may be nervous, they'll just ask you some questions. Did you graduate from college? Did you enjoy your time at college? Uh, do you do you like working in this particular field? Just to get you comfortable. Maybe talk about the weather. This is kind of like ice breaking. Then once they feel that they've made some progress and maybe you're calmed down a little bit, then they may proceed into some more open-ended questions. Other times they decide to use inverted funnel as there's some questions that they just want to get out of the way to make sure that it's accurate with what you have on your resume or on your job application. And then they will proceed to the more open-ended questions that you're probably expecting. The STAR method is a structured manner of responding to a behavioral-based interview question by discussing the specific situation, the task, the action, and the result of the situation that you're describing. The situation could be a situation that you were in or the task that you needed to accomplish. You must describe a specific event or situation and not a generalized description of what you have done in the past. Then the task, that's what goal were you working towards. And then the action, that's where you describe the action you took to address the situation with an appropriate amount of detail, and make sure you keep the focus on you. What specific steps did you take, and what was your particular contribution? And then finally, the result. That's where you describe the outcome of your actions, and you don't be shy about taking credit for your behavior. For example, let's say a situation could be, there was advertising revenue that was falling off of my college newspaper, and large numbers of long-term advertisers were not renewing their contracts. So my task was, my goal was to generate new ideas, materials, and incentives that would result in at least 15% increase in advertisers from the year before. So what could the action be? Well, I designed a new promotional packet to go with the rate sheet, and I compared the benefits. Also set up a special training session for account executives. Okay, then what were the results? Well, we signed contracts with 15 former advertisers for daily ads, and we increased our new advertisers by 20%. If you notice, this was very specific. So what you need to do before your interview is you need to go over things that's happened to you in the past. They may say, describe a situation where you had some conflict. How did you handle the conflict? If they ask questions like that, then they're looking for the STAR method. They want you to describe the situation. What were you doing? What was your goal? What action did you take? Maybe the results weren't good. If the results were bad, you can say, it was my fault and I learned from this situation. But you want to describe the event accurately. You want to make sure that you give them a verbal picture of what was going on. So you need to spend a lot of time in preparation for a job interview. When they ask questions in the interview, they're trying to see if you fit into their organization. The best way for them to see this is by asking questions with your work history. If you have work history, then the interview could go a lot easier than if you don't have any work history. Questions that they could ask is, how did you get along with some of your previous co-workers? Was there ever a time whenever you had disagreements with co-workers? If so, how did you handle it? Was there ever a time when you had a disagreement with a customer? If you work especially in customer service, what happened and how did it end? How did you handle the situation? They may ask you situational things like, what would you do if you saw somebody cheating on their time card, or somebody that always came in late and left early? How would you handle that? Again, the best thing to do is the night before your big interview, make sure you go over every detail of your work career. Let them know that you've got experience and you want to sell yourself. Let them know that you really want this job and that you would be the very best employee that they could have. The best way to do this is through you talking about your work history. This is so important. You don't want to clam up. You want to make sure that you expand on things. And you want to be prepared because you don't want to have that deer in the headlights look whenever they ask a question. At the conclusion of the interview, now you can ask the questions. Things that you could ask would be, tell me what a normal day consists of. You could also ask, what do you like about this position? Why do you like working for this company? And then at the very conclusion, whenever it's all wrapping up, you should ask for a business card if available. Sometimes if you're being interviewed inside the office of one of the supervisors, they may have a business card there. If that's the case, ask for the business card and tell them thank you. And what you want to do is you want to get their email address and then send them a thank you note. And in that thank you note, you could say, I want to thank you for taking the time to interview me. Why do you want to do this? Well, number one, they've seen your name on the resume. Number two, they've seen your name in the interview. And now, after they have interviewed you, they're going to see your name again for the third time. They're going to see your name on the thank you note. And what if you're the only one out of the 10 people that they interviewed, the only person that sends a thank you? That says a lot. You want them to remember you. So this is a good thing to do, to try to get their email address, and the easiest way to do that is from a business card. When it comes to job interviews, this is the apex of interpersonal communication. This is either between you and another person or you and a few other people. And now this is the time for you to sell yourself. You need to sell your work experience and your college experience. You need to make sure that you use all the nonverbal skills that we've discussed in class and all the verbal skills that we've discussed in class. This is the time to put it all into action so that you can start on your career, the career that you've prepared quite a few years for. And as always, I want to wish you the very best of luck.